The flame from the single candle flickers gently, casting a soft glow across the quiet kitchen. He steadies the match for a moment longer than needed, watching the tiny light as if it might answer the thoughts in his head. Beside the cake, small, simple, one slice already plated, sits another plate untouched, positioned across from him at the table. His eyes drift to the framed photo on the counter, his late wife, smiling in the spring sunlight, hair caught in a breeze. He speaks softly to her, as if she's only a room away, telling her it's another year, another birthday, and yes, he's keeping the tradition, even if the chair opposite stays empty. The buzz of his phone cuts through the quiet. A message glows on the screen from Maya. "Dad, I'm slammed this week. Let's do your birthday next month." The words feel casual, almost apologetic, yet distant. He reads it twice, the corners of his mouth curling into a faint smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. His reply is short, warm, and understanding, because that's what she expects. Because grace has always been easier than guilt. He sets the phone down, but his hand lingers, fingertips resting against the counter. The ache is small but sharp, like a hairline cracking glass. His gaze shifts to the far corner where a small, neatly wrapped box waits. The paper is silver, the ribbon tied carefully, the edges perfectly folded. Inside rests a restored music box, one Maya had adored as a child, its lullaby worn silent over the years until he'd found someone to bring it back to life. He takes in the sight of it, the gift meant for her, and for a brief moment imagines the look on her face when she opens it. Then he exhales slowly, the flame on the candle wavering with his breath, and leans back in his chair, alone with the sound of the ticking clock. The phone rings again, this time not with a chime of casual text, but the steady vibration of a call. He glances at the screen. Ruth, his late wife's paralegal, a name tied to paper, signatures, and the kind of conversations most people avoid. He answers with the same calm voice he always reserves for her, and she gets straight to the point. She reminds him about the trust his wife had set up years ago, back when they still planned decades ahead together. The paperwork has a small clause. Beneficiary changes must be signed before midnight on his birthday if he ever wants to adjust them. After tonight, the window closes for another year. He nods silently, even though she can't see him, his mind already drifting to the plan he'd made. A small dinner, just him and Maya, where he would quietly pass the papers across the table and tell her the trust was his now, just as her mother had wished. But with her absence tonight, something shifts. Not in anger, not in spite, but in quiet clarity. This isn't about taking anything away. It's about making sure what's given is respected, guarded, valued. Protection, not punishment. When Ruth asks if he wants her to prepare the file anyway, he simply says yes, his voice steady, the decision already taking root in the stillness of his thoughts. In the years since his wife passed, the jasmine planting had become their quiet ritual. No cards, no balloons, no elaborate meals, just father and daughter, hands in the soil, pressing life into the ground together. The first year, Maya's fingers were clumsy with the roots, but she'd laugh through the awkwardness, smudges of dirt across her cheeks. Over time, she learned how to dig just deep enough, how to firm the earth without bruising the plant, how to pour the water in slow circles so it would settle in. Every cutting came from the same mother plant in the garden, the one his wife had tended like it was a living memory. One day, his wife had said, "This garden will outgrow us both, but not the love we plant into it." This year, the message came early in the week. Maya's voice over the phone was brisk, fretted with the hum of traffic and city noise. "Dad, I can't make it this weekend. We're launching the new campaign and it's huge for me." She promised they'd do it soon, her tone more distracted than apologetic. So he stood there alone on a mild afternoon, gloves on, the jasmine cutting in his hand. The garden felt larger without another presence in it. He knelt by the spot they'd chosen last year, dug the hole, and pressed the roots into the soil. His fingers worked methodically, but his mind wandered to his wife's voice, the way she'd once leaned close and said softly, "Teach her what love looks like and what it doesn't." He poured the water carefully, watching it soak in, the scent of jasmine leaves rising into the air. For a moment, he rested his palm on the earth, as if steadying something fragile. Then he stood, brushing the dirt from his hands, the silence of the empty garden following him back to the house. The phone buzzed again that evening, this time with Ethan's name lighting up the screen. His son-in-law's voice came warm, practiced, the kind of friendliness that feels like it's meant to smooth over something else. "Hey, I was thinking, let's do a proper dinner for you sometime next week. Capello's, maybe? Maya's been swamped, but we'll make it special." The words were dressed up, but the timing gave them away. This wasn't about the date of his birthday. It was about fitting him in somewhere between their own plans. He thanked Ethan, his tone as polite as the offer, but declined. "I've already got something on the calendar this weekend," he said, leaving it at that. No further explanation. When the call ended, he looked at the small envelope tucked under a paperweight on his desk. Inside was an invitation to the annual charity gala, an event he'd quietly supported for years. This year was different. He wasn't just attending. They were honoring him, publicly, for his work mentoring and funding community projects in his wife's name. He thought about mentioning it to Maya, but the impulse faded almost as soon as it came. Some moments, he had learned, were best left to be discovered on their own, especially when recognition was never the reason for the work. The envelope stayed where it was, unopened, its weight light in the hand but heavy with meaning. He sat at his desk late that night, the house quiet except for the slow hum of the fridge in the next room. The papers Ruth had sent over lay neatly stacked in front of him, a pen resting across the top page. He'd read through them twice already, though he knew every clause by heart. The trust wasn't just money. It carried with it the lakeside cottage his wife had adored. They'd spent summers there when Maya was young, the air thick with the scent of pine, her laughter echoing off the water as she chased dragonflies along the shore. His wife had always said the cottage would be Maya's one day, when she's ready to care for it like a living thing. That had been the plan. Tonight, it still could be, just not yet. He picked up the pen, his hand steady, and signed the amendment Ruth had prepared. The trust, for now, would go to the community scholarship fund they'd built in his wife's name, a program that sent first-generation students to college with everything they needed to start. The cottage would be held under the same arrangement. It wasn't about taking anything away from Maya. He told himself that, and it was the truth. This was a pause, not an erasure, a way to protect what mattered until the relationship between them was more than dates on a calendar or polite phone calls squeezed between meetings. When he was done, he set the pen down and leaned back in his chair. Through the open window, the night air carried the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. The cottage, the trust, the memories, they would wait. Just as he had been waiting, quietly, for her to remember that showing up was the real inheritance. The music box sat on the table, its silver ribbon catching the afternoon light. He ran a hand over the polished wood, tracing the tiny painted flowers along its lid. The craftsman had done well. Every scratch from the years was smoothed away, but the heart of it, the soft warmth of something held in small hands long ago, was still there. He remembered the first time Maya had heard it play. She was 6, curled in her mother's lap, turning the tiny brass key with clumsy fingers. The melody had filled the room, soft, lilting, like a lullaby that already knew the shape of their hearts. For years, it had been their quiet ritual before bed, until the day the spring broke, and it fell silent. Now, it was whole again. He slipped it into a plain canvas tote, the kind you could carry without drawing a second glance. Beside it, he placed a folded note, written in his steady hand. "This was always for you. If you have 5 minutes, wind it. It remembers the song we used to sing." That evening, he drove to her townhouse. The street was busy, cars lining both sides, porch lights beginning to glow in the early dusk. He set the tote carefully at her front door, adjusting it so the ribbon faced outward. For a moment, he hovered, his finger brushing the doorbell. Then he stepped back. No sound, no knock, no signal that he'd been there at all. He turned, walking away without looking back, the melody he hadn't heard in decades echoing quietly in his mind. The call came just as he was rinsing his coffee cup. Maya's name lit up the screen. But when he answered, it was a smaller, brighter voice on the other end. "Hi, Grandpa. It's me, Leo." The boy's words tumbled over each other, full of excitement. "Are you coming to Mommy's surprise?" He paused, the mug still in his hand. "Surprise?" he asked, careful to keep his tone light. "Yeah, we're doing something for you. Mommy said it's for your birthday, but not today, 'cause she's busy. We're gonna go to a restaurant with balloons." The warmth in his chest was mixed with something else, an understanding settling in quietly. They had made plans, yes, but not for tonight. Not for the day that actually mattered. The tradition, the candle, the presents, those had been moved aside. "That sounds wonderful, Leo," he said softly. "But you know, Grandpa's not sure he can make it to the surprise." There was a small pause on the line. "Oh, okay. Can you tell me a story then? The one about the stars and the boat." He smiled, leaning against the counter. "Of course. But how about I tell you that story the next time we see each other? And I'll make it even better than you remember." Leo's voice lifted again, content with the promise. "Deal." When the call ended, he stood there for a long moment, the kitchen quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge. Even through the ache, he held on to the image of his grandson's eager face, because not everything, he knew, had to be lost in order to be saved. The first text came in mid-afternoon, a polite ping from Ethan. "We booked Capello's for Friday night. Fancy place. You'll like it." Before he could even set the phone down, another bubble appeared. "It's kind of for Maya's promotion too. But we'll toast you, of course." He read them twice, the words leaving a faint, metallic taste in his mouth. The intention wasn't unkind, but it was clear enough. This wasn't about marking his day. It was about fitting him into a larger picture where he was no longer the center, just a name on the guest list that could be acknowledged in passing. For a moment, he considered replying with a simple "see you then." It would be easy. No awkwardness, no questions. But something in him resisted the idea of being celebrated as an afterthought. He typed instead, "Thank you, but I won't be able to make it." No excuse, no elaboration. Just the truth he was finally willing to stand in. That evening, with the light fading in the garden, he opened his leather-bound journal and began to write. The pen moved slowly at first, then steadied into the kind of sentence that felt carved rather than written. Love without presence withers into performance. He closed the journal, slid it back onto the shelf, and sat for a while in the quiet, letting the weight of the words settle into the stillness around him. A gentle knock sounded at the side door just after sunset. When he opened it, Mrs. Patel stood there with a small tray, 2 cups of steaming lemon tea, the kind his wife had always accepted with a smile. "I made too much," she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission, the way old neighbors do. She set the tray on the table and looked around the kitchen, her gaze softening at the framed photo of his wife. "She used to sit right there," Mrs. Patel said quietly, pointing to the chair by the window, "always asking about my garden, even when Hayes looked better than mine." They both laughed, the sound carrying a thread of memory between them. As they sipped the tea, he found himself speaking more than usual, about the birthday, about Maya's business, about the silence that sometimes felt heavier than words. Mrs. Patel listened, then reached across the table, her hand warm on his. "Boundaries," she said, "aren't walls. They're doors with good locks. You open them when you choose, and only to those who knock with respect." The words settled in him like the lemon's sharpness cutting through sweetness. Later, when she had gone, he stood at his desk and looked at the unopened gala envelope. He broke the seal, slid the card out, and read his own name printed in gold among the list of honorees. The decision came quietly, almost naturally. He would go, not to make a point, not to prove anything, but to let his life speak in the places where it was valued. The night of the gala arrived cool and clear, the kind of evening that carried the scent of autumn in its edges. He stood before the mirror in his bedroom, adjusting the collar of a modest charcoal suit. Nothing flashy, just the same one he'd worn to weddings, graduations, and quiet farewells. A polished watch, his wedding band still on his hand, and the faintest whiff of cologne he'd saved for rare occasions. The venue glowed from the street, light spilling from tall windows, the hum of conversation already alive inside. He stepped through the doors and was greeted not with distant nods but with warm embraces. Former students spotted him first, grown now, with careers and families of their own. A young man in a navy blazer clasped his hand. "You helped me buy my first set of tools. I wouldn't be where I am without that." A woman, now a teacher herself, smiled through glassy eyes. "That kit you gave me, it was more than pencils and paper. It was someone believing I'd make it." The night unfolded in a gentle montage, clinks of glasses, laughter echoing under high ceilings, hands shaking his, stories flowing freely about the quiet ways he had shown up for people when it mattered most. When his name was called, the applause felt like a tide pulling him forward. He walked to the stage under the glow of warm spotlights, accepted the glass award, and stood at the microphone. No long speeches, no layered subtext meant for absent ears. Just a simple truth. I was taught to show up, even when it's inconvenient. The rest takes care of itself. A soft murmur of agreement moved through the crowd before the clapping rose again. Cameras flashed, one belonging to the local paper, its photographer lingering a moment to capture him with the award in hand, the gold lettering of his name visible against the dark suit. He returned to his table, setting the award beside his plate as the night carried on, music and conversation weaving together. Somewhere, folded in a notebook in a newsroom, that photograph would soon find its place, slated for Sunday's edition, ready to tell a part of his story Maya had never seen. Ruth's office was quiet in the late morning, sunlight spilling across her desk in long, neat lines. She had already prepared the documents, each page clipped and tabbed for his signature. There was no small talk, just the gentle efficiency of someone who understood both the weight and the necessity of the moment. He sat across from her, pen in hand, reading through the amendment one last time. The change was clear. The trust in the lakeside cottage would, for now, be redirected to the Community Scholarship Fund. A clause in the final paragraph allowed the original arrangement to be reinstated at any time, provided there had been a meeting with Maya where both sides agreed on boundaries moving forward. When he signed the last page, Ruth slid the papers into a folder and set it aside. "It's not permanent," she said softly. "Just a pause." He nodded. "That's all it needs to be." Before leaving, he opened his leather-bound notebook and pulled out a single sheet of paper. In his careful handwriting, he drafted a letter addressed to Maya. Not accusatory, not bitter, but honest. It spoke of the values her mother had lived by, the importance of presence over performance, and the hope that they could meet again as family, not just as names on each other's calendars. He placed the letter in an envelope and handed it to Ruth with quiet instructions. Deliver it only if 30 days passed without a call, a visit, or even a message from Maya. Walking out into the sunlight, the decision felt lighter than he expected. Not final, not cruel, just a line drawn in calm, steady ink. Saturday evening, the lights at Capello's glowed across the sidewalk, the hum of conversation spilling through the open doors. Inside, a long table had been set, balloons clustered at one end, a cake positioned at the other. The small placard at the center read, "Congratulations, Maya," with "Happy belated birthday," Dad written just below in smaller script. Maya checked her phone for the third time, scanning for a message. She'd received only one earlier in the day. "I'm celebrating with your mother tonight. Wishing you a wonderful evening." The words were warm, but final. Across town, the tote with the music box sat on her console table, unopened since it had appeared at her door. Something about it had felt fragile, like a moment she didn't want to rush. When the guests had gone and the house was quiet, she finally untied the silver ribbon. The lid of the music box clicked softly, and as she turned the brass key, a familiar melody filled the room. Thin at first, then steady. Leo, in his pajamas, padded into the living room. "That's the song," he whispered, as if the sound might break if he spoke too loudly. Without thinking, he began to hum along, the tune etched somewhere deep from bedtime stories long ago. Maya's throat tightened. She sat down beside him, watching the slow spin of the figurine inside the box. The memory of her mother's hands, her father's voice, and a younger version of herself wove together in the melody. By the time the song wound to a stop, her eyes were wet, and she couldn't quite tell if it was from regret, love, or something heavier that had been waiting a long time to surface. Sunday morning, the paper lay folded neatly on Maya's doorstep, the front page catching her eye before she'd even picked it up. There, in full color, was her father, modest suit, glass award in hand, smiling in that quiet, steady way she remembered from childhood. The headline read, "Engineer Funds 120 Student Toolkits, Credits Late Wife." She carried it inside, settling at the kitchen table as she skimmed the article. It detailed years of quiet contributions, first-generation college kits, mentorship programs, even emergency grants, most of it done anonymously. Scrolling through the online version, she found dozens of comments from people he'd helped. He showed up when no one else did. He believed in me before I believed in myself. Each line chipped at something in her. She realized she had no idea about most of this. No late-night phone calls to ask how it was going, no offers to help with his projects. In truth, she hadn't really seen her father in years, only reached for him when she needed something. The screen blurred slightly as she stared at his photo, the image holding steady while her own view of him shifted entirely. The tires crunched over the gravel as Maya pulled into her father's driveway, the morning sun casting long shadows across the yard. She spotted him in the back garden, crouched low, hands deep in the soil, pressing the last jasmine cutting into place. The air was rich with its scent, carried on a soft breeze. She stepped through the open gate, the sound of it creaking making him glance up. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. No tension, no sharp edges, just the quiet acknowledgement of shared history. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice steady but low. "I've been treating love like it's something I can schedule, like it's just another thing on the calendar." He didn't respond right away, brushing dirt from his palms before standing. She could see the years in his eyes, the patience and the quiet ache. "I should have been here," she added. "Not just for the planting. For you." The jasmine leaves stirred in the breeze between them, the silence saying as much as any words could. They stood a few steps apart, the garden's earth still fresh beneath their feet. He took a slow breath, choosing his words with care. "The trust," he began, "is paused. Not to punish you, but to protect what your mother asked me to protect, how we love." His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. "Money, property, those are just tools. But presence, respect, that's the foundation. Without it, everything else falls apart." She nodded, not defensive, just listening. "I'll reinstate it," he continued, "when we both keep certain promises. One dinner together every month, phones silent. One shade day each quarter, giving our time to something that matters. And on both days, even 15 minutes spent showing up in person." Maya's eyes softened, the weight of his terms landing not as demands, but as invitations. "I can do that," she said quietly. After a pause, she added, "We could start tonight. Tea by the jasmine. And maybe," her voice wavered just slightly, "we can win the music box together." A small smile touched his face. "That sounds just right." A week later, he sat once more at Ruth's desk, the papers spread before him. With a steady hand, he restored Maya as the trust beneficiary, adding one quiet clause. A fixed percentage would always flow to the scholarship fund in her mother's name, a permanent thread tying their family to service. That evening, as the jasmine scent drifted through the open window, he wound the music box and let its melody fill the room. "Presence is the music," he thought. "The rest is just the box."